What are we discussing on today's Locked On Diamondbacks podcast? Dbacks lose game one to the turf. Is Fanduel finally giving the Dbacks some respect? And we know the NL West is maybe the hottest division in baseball, but is it the best division?
You are Locked On Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use code all lowercase LockedOnMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. I'm the host of this podcast, Millard Thomas. I'm a multimedia journalist and I'm a graphic designer, so please go check out my website, MillardThomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. On today's Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, we'll talk about that horrendous Game 1 loss to the Tampa Bay Rays, checking in on our friends at Fanduel to see if they're finally giving the D-backs some respect on their odds. And then we know the NL West is probably the hottest division in baseball, but is it the best division in baseball? Power ranking all divisions. And of course, if you want to see more of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, please hit subscribe to Locked On Diamondbacks on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. But now let's get into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast and talk about that Game 1 loss to the Tampa Bay Rays. D-backs lose 5-4, and to be honest, this felt like more of a game where the D-backs didn't lose to Tampa, but lost to that horrendous stadium that needs to be renovated. I do think Tampa's going to get a new stadium soon because Tropicana Field is not it. I was actually at Tropicana not that long ago. I caught a Rays game a few weeks ago, actually, late July. I went to Tampa Bay versus, I actually can't even remember. Against the Cincinnati Reds, because I remember Ella De La Cruz was playing. That was the only saving grace from that game. But going to the stadium, I mean, walking around, first of all, if you've never been to Tampa, the concourse, I don't really know how to describe it. It's like you're inside like a high school basketball gym or something like that. Like the ceilings are low. You're basically in the underground too of the stadium. Like, you know how you feel like you're in the players tunnel walking around the stadium. Like half the concourse either makes you feel like you're in a high school basketball gymnasium or you're in the underground player tunnel, because I think it's quite literally the underground tunnel that you're in, because you actually walk up toward the lower level when you're entering your seats. And so it was quite literally probably the bottom of my list of power rankings of MLB stadiums. And I haven't been to all MLB stadiums, of course. I'm not that good, guys. I haven't been to every stadium. But all the stadiums I've been to, I would probably say Tampa Bay is dead last. I mean, I've been to Yankee Stadium. I'm just looking at standings and going through all the teams I know I've been to. Been to Yankee Stadium. I've been to Met Stadium. I've been to, of course, Chase Field. I've been to Miami. I've been to Petco. And I think of all the teams I've been to, the 5 or 6, 7 stadiums I've been to, Tampa Bay was by far the worst experience. It just, the vibe, it's just not it. When you just go there, it's like a depressing, dark inside, like. And that's just the concourse. And then, of course, you got the dome. Of course, Chase Field also has a retractable roof. But I love, it's grown on me, Chase Field with a retractable roof. I'm actually pro it now. When I first went to Chase Field, I did not think it was an appealing stadium. Now I think it's a vibe, especially when you grade it on the curve of you're in Arizona. It's extremely hot outside. So I actually do like Chase Field a lot. But Tampa Bay, Tropicana Field, that was not a very fun experience. The game itself was fine. The people were actually fantastic. I loved every vendor I talked to at Tampa Bay, but the stadium itself was not good. And, of course, the playing field also not good, as we saw some mistakes by the D-backs outfield. I mean, Lourdes Gurriel first in that 8th inning, he misplayed the ball, and then it just takes a weird bounce. Took a second to corral it, get it in. That's how Tampa scores and ties it up in the 8th inning. And then in the 9th inning, Jake McCarthy just has trouble picking it up off the turf. And then, of course, it takes that weird bounce off the mound as well. Like, you just look at this game, and I felt like it was more, yes, the D-backs defense crumbled, but did they crumble because of the turf and the weird stadium conditions? Maybe. I mean, the Rays themselves were making mistakes and had trouble fielding the ball at times because of the stadium. Like, it's just not conducive to a good playing environment. And I think the D-backs kind of got bit because of playing in Tropicana. Now, I do want to put some onus on the D-backs team itself. I mean, the offense was extremely quiet after the first inning. They did not do much at all. They definitely could have put some more runs on the board. So the offense does need some onus there. The defense could, take a little accountability as well for needing to be better. And especially Ryan Thompson. I mean, this was just a bad Ryan Thompson day. I think he's given up a run now, like 5 of his last 7 outings. Maybe he's hitting a little bit of a wall. He gave up 3 earned runs in this one. Maybe he should have just went to Kevin Ginkel in that 8th inning instead of Thompson, who has not been as effective recently. Just not a good performance by the bullpen, not a good performance by the defense, and overall, the stadium turf did not do the D-backs any favors. Now, if we want to talk about some positives, Ryan Nelson, absolutely fantastic. The movement on his changeup, the heat and the velo on his fastball cutter, like Ryan Nelson looks fantastic. Quality start. The way I want to open this segment up was hopefully going to be after a D-backs win, and then I was going to start it off by saying you don't need to worry about the bullpen being taxed with a 6-man rotation if Ryan Nelson is going to pitch like this, because he once again had a quality start. He's coming off a gem against the Phillies. Now he gives you another 6.1 innings pitch, 1 earned run, 6 strikeouts. Like, Ryan Nelson was absolutely locked in out there, and that's why it's so hard to take him out the rotation right now if you're the D-backs. 2.73 ERA since July 1st. That's 9 starts, I believe. He's been absolutely fantastic for the D-backs, and that's why it's hard to take him out this rotation. Yes, the bullpen's a little bit more weak because of it, but if Ryan Nelson and Monty can continue to deliver quality starts, then the bullpen is going to be okay. And then, how about a little bit of the clutch Corbin Carroll late in the game, down to your final strike and out. Corbin Carroll clutches it out with a 2-run shot to right field. And he's actually been extremely clutch for the D-backs in the second half of the season. Let's not forget, back on July 29th, he had the pinch hit walk-off home run against the Washington Nationals. And then just a couple games ago against the Colorado Rockies, the Jake McCarthy walk-off, well, that inning started with the Corbin Carroll triple to get the bats going. He's been incredible recently, and we know since June 1st, like Corbin Carroll now has a long stretch of having like over a 500 slugging. Like, the average and contact ability overall hasn't been there for Corbin Carroll, but over the last 6 weeks, 2 months, the power has been there for Carroll, and he once again displayed it today. McCarthy stays hot with a couple more hits. Lourdes Gurriel continues to heat up, 2 more hits for him. Now his average is up to 271. D-backs look to bounce back in game number 2 against Tampa, and I think their offense is going to respond in a big way with, it looks like, Ketel Marte making a return to the lineup. So D-backs hopefully can make a statement in game number 2. But I want to talk about the D-backs World Series odds and see if they're finally getting some respect from our friends at Fanduel in segment number 2. But hey, if you're thinking about joining a daily fantasy sports app, then I suggest you join Prize Picks, because it's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. It is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps, on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stats projections and watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. If you're looking for promotions, Prize Picks has got you covered every week. Prize Picks is available in more than 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, and Georgia. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks for a deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right. Let's get back into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast and discuss if our friends from Fanduel are finally giving our team some respect. I don't think these odds are going to be updated after today's game against Tampa Bay, but that's okay. It's probably the odds are actually probably going to be better in our favors after today's loss to Tampa Bay. So let's go through some FanDuel categories and see if the D-backs are finally get some respect, because as we've done this throughout the season, the D-backs were always behind some teams in those World Series odds where it's like, no way you think that team is better than the D-backs. No way you think that team has a better chance of winning the World Series than the team that just got there last year and could have won it. But that's how FanDuel has treated the D-backs at times this year. But it looks like they're finally giving them some respect, because I think for the first time, maybe all season, they're finally top 10 in World Series odds. At least since the last time I've looked, they're finally top 10 in World Series odds. They are 3-6. They are actually number 10th in World Series odds, and I'm okay with that in terms of where they're slotted. They're right behind the San Diego Padres at plus 1,900. The D-backs are plus 2,200. But if we're being honest, both of those teams should be a little bit higher in these odds, because a couple teams that are ahead of them, the Cleveland Guardians, have the 6th best odds at plus 1,500. And then the Twins have the 8th best odds at plus 1,700. Do you really see a world where the Cleveland Guardians or the Minnesota Twins have a higher chance of winning the World Series than the D-backs or Padres? Can you really see the Twins taking down the Yankees or the Orioles in the American League and then getting to the World Series and then beating Arizona, San Diego? Like, I just don't see it. At least with the D-backs, I've seen them run through the gauntlet last year, and I think they're better potentially than any team that could come out the American League this year. I think they at least match up with any team that comes out the AL this year. I just don't think the Twins and the Guardians could say the same against the teams in their own league and then against the teams that come out the National League. So I'm okay with the D-backs being right behind the Padres. That's fine, but both the Padres and the D-backs need to leapfrog, I think, at least two teams ahead of them in World Series odds. How about this one? League winners. What are the odds that the D-backs can win the National League? They are currently with 5, the 5th best odds in the NL to win the NL, and I think that's fine for the D-backs. They're ahead of the Brewers. They're ahead of the Mets. I think that's fine. They're right behind the Padres, the Braves, the Phillies, and Dodgers. That makes sense. Why I like this one for the D-backs, they are 5th, but I actually don't mind that. I think they do have a better chance than the Padres or even the Braves at this point to win the NL. But I like the fact that they're 5th, because if you believe the D-backs are going to the World Series like I do, or I think they're going to run the gauntlet again that they did last season. It's not going to be easy, but I do think the way the D-backs are playing, they're going to the World Series again. They at least have the talent to do it. They're playing with the way they're playing. They're showing us they have the ability to do it. I actually like the fact that they're 5th in these odds, because it means at plus 900 currently, you can get some tremendous value on the D-backs. If you believe what I'm preaching, that Arizona is going back to the World Series, go on FanDuel, place some shekels down on the D-backs at plus 900 currently to win the National League, because I think as the season goes on, especially if the D-backs keep up their rate and maybe they surpass the Dodgers in the NL West, or if they win the division, like, these odds are going to shrink to like plus 400, maybe plus 300. Like, if the D-backs end the season as the leader of the NL West, like, the Dodgers currently have the best, or I guess the lowest odds. I don't really know how to package it. They have the lowest odds to win the NL at plus 170, and they also lead the NL West. If you tell me the D-backs end the season as the NL West division leader, are they not going to be around plus 200 with some terrible odds to win the National League? You're not going to, there's no value on that. But the D-backs right now are plus 900, 5th best odds to make it to the World Series. I think that's tremendous value. So I actually like the fact that they're getting a little bit of disrespect being 5th in the National League odds to win the pennant. And then if you really think that the D-backs are going to beat the Dodgers for the NL West title and beat out the Padres as well, the D-backs at plus 500 right now to win the NL West. The Padres are at plus 420. Dodgers still minus 280, so still pretty good favorites for the NL West. But The D-backs at plus 500, they're going to be no worse than 3 games back at the, if the Dodgers win today. I'm recording this before the Dodgers final score. So if the D-backs, at worst are within 3 games at the time of us recording this podcast. I mean, by the time you guys listen to this podcast, the D-backs might be like plus 550 in the NL West if they're 3 games back of the Dodgers. So I think those are pretty good odds. I don't think personally I would bet on the D-backs to win the division. I still don't know if I see that in their cards. I definitely think it's possible, but I think the Dodgers will probably do just enough to win the division by a game. And you still got the San Diego Padres too, of course. I would rather take the plus 900 and bet on the D-backs to win the National League instead of the NL West, because even though it's tougher to win the National League, I think the value there is a little bit better. I also just have a belief that they probably won't win the division, but I do think they could run the gauntlet and get back to another World Series. And now let's look at the MVP odds, because this is also where I made a prediction right at the All-Star break where I said I believe Ketel Marte can finish top 5 in MVP voting by the end of the season. And Ketel Marte, so far in the second half of the year, has been absolutely on fire. He's been, we talk about Jake McCarthy, right, and the hot streak he's been on in the second half of the season. We've talked about Jock Peterson, the streak he's been on in the second half of the season as well. Like, there's been so many D-backs that have been absolutely on fire, but we also can't overlook the guy who was starting in the All-Star game at second base. The guy who's the D-backs MVP in the first half of the season has only gotten better in the second half of the year. In his first 92 games of the year, Ketel Marte had 19 home runs, a 293 average, and 877 OPS. Well, in 22 games post All-Star break, he has 11 home runs. He had 19 the first 92. He has 11 his last 22 with a 324 average with 1186 OPS. He is climbing in the MVP rankings. He is climbing in the MVP odds, and currently on Fanduel, he is number 2 in odds. I believe the last time we did this at the All-Star break, I think Ketel Marte was like 5th or 6th in MVP odds. Now he is 2nd, and Shohei Ohtani is, of course, still the favorite for MVP in the National League, which is not a surprise to anyone, but Ketel Marte at plus 950 is actually running away with 2nd place. Marcell Ozuna is 3rd at plus 5,000. Ella De La Cruz and Bryce Harper tied for 4th at plus 6,500. So Ketel Marte just clearly ahead of the rest. Shohei Ohtani still leading it by a landslide at minus 2,300, but FanDuel is at least giving the respect of saying it's Ohtani, then there's the Grand Canyon, then it's Marte, then it's another Grand Canyon, then it's the rest of the candidates. It's Ohtani on his own tier, Marte on his own tier, then there's everyone else. I think that's perfect. Ketel Marte finally getting some love, some respect that he deserves. Everyone is seeing how good Ketel Marte is. He's back to being the best second baseman in baseball. We've been talking about on this podcast how we've always believed in the talent of Marte, but really since 2019, he hasn't been able to show it. 2020 was such a weird up and down year for the whole D-backs team. 2021, he was fantastic, but dealt with injuries and basically only played half the season. 2022, a really weird down year where Ketel Marte offensively just did not have it. Then last year, a very nice bounce back for Ketel Marte where he reestablished himself as an all-star level second baseman and one of the best second basemen in baseball. But this year, he has reestablished himself as a superstar player, not just superstar second baseman, superstar overall, MVP candidate, and he has the talent to be the best player on a team that makes it to the postseason and potentially the World Series. So love to see FanDuel finally giving some respect to our guy Ketel Marte and finally giving some respect to the D-backs overall. And now I want to talk about, is the NL West the best division in baseball? We'll rank them in segment number 3. But if you're trying to stay hydrated this summer, then of course I suggest Liquid IV, because when you're taking in America's pastime, don't forget to hydrate with Liquid IV's popsicle firecracker flavor, a surefire summer hit. Tear, pour, live more. One stick plus 16 ounces of water hydrates better than water alone. Powered by LIV Hydroscience, an optimized ratio of electrolytes, essential vitamins, and clinically tested nutrients that turn ordinary water into extraordinary hydration. 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, 8 essential vitamins and nutrients, always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free, and soy-free. No more thirsty summers when you indulge in hydration with Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code MLB at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code MLB at liquidiv.com. All right. Let's get back to the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. I want to talk about the best divisions in baseball, because the NL West is probably the hottest division in baseball. If you look since June 1st, 3 of the 6 best records are in the NL West. Dbacks the best, Padres third best, and then Dodgers 6th best. So we know the NL West has at least been the hottest division in baseball the last couple months. But is it the best division in baseball? That's why I want to do a quick power ranking and discuss the divisions based on the contenders they have, the teams that they have just on the cusp, and the scrubs in the division. So number 6 in my little power ranking, I got the NL Central. I just look at this division and I say, they have the least talented division leader of any of these teams, the Milwaukee Brewers. If I had to just power rank the division leaders in every division, I think I would have the Brewers last, just because I don't like that team talent-wise on paper if we're in a postseason setting. As I've always said, I think the Brewers are built for the regular season, not the playoffs. And then you look at the rest of the division in the NL Central, it's a bunch of teams that are on the cusp. I don't think there's any scrubs in the Central, even down to the Pirates. I think all those teams are feisty. I think a team like the Pirates and the Reds are like a year or two away from being really scary in the National League. Cardinals and Cubs, who knows if they could potentially turn it around quickly and add some talent. But at least those 4 teams think in the next 2 years they could be maybe more or less competitive than they are right now. All 4 of those teams potentially think they could, work their way into the postseason if they make a couple of moves, right? I just think overall the NL Central has the least amount of talent of any division that we're going to be talking about today. That's why they're number 6 in my power ranking. At number 5, I have the AL West, which is kind of crazy because on paper, coming into the year, you would have thought Astros, Rangers, Mariners is going to be a 3-headed monster for who could win that division, and that just has not been the case. The Astros have the worst record among all division leaders, and overall, the Astros, Rangers, and Mariners have just been kind of disappointing this year. The Astros have picked it up over the last couple months, but overall, they still don't have a great record. They're 10 games above 500 right now. They look like they're finally catching fire as we enter the second half of the season. But for most of the year, they were kind of disappointing. The Mariners, I don't know what happened to them. They just been kind of, fine. They've been good, but not great this year. 3 games above 500. It looks like they're going to be missing out on the postseason unless they catch the Astros. And then the Rangers have just been awful this year. 10 games below 500 as the reigning World Series champs. I don't know what's happened to those 3 teams in the division. Astros are finally looking good, but the Mariners have been a little disappointing relative to expectations, and then the Rangers have just been dreadful this year. And then, of course, A's and Angels are still 2 of the worst teams in Major League Baseball. That's why the AL West is checking in at number 5. At number 4, we got the NL Central. Could be a small market bias here because I think you definitely could flip them with the next division I'm going to talk about based on the numbers, but I can't help it. I look at the NL Central. Yes, the Guardians, the Twins, and Royals are really good. The run differentials are fantastic. They have 3 of the best records in baseball. They might send 3 teams to the playoffs, but I just don't trust them from a ceiling perspective. Guardians, Twins, and Royals, I think, are all high floor teams, good regular season teams, but they kind of all feel like the Brewers to me, where they're built for the regular season. I can't see any of those 3 teams running through the gauntlet and getting to a World Series. Maybe that's crazy because A lot of the American League teams I probably feel the same way about, but the Guardians, Twins, and Royals, I just don't think those teams have a high enough ceiling in terms of World Series talk as compared to some of the teams are going to be talked about in the next division. And also, you can't forget they also have the Chicago White Sox, who are the most dysfunctional franchise in Major League Baseball this season. They are just rudderless right now and going nowhere, so I have to put them at number 4. Number 3 is the NL East. And again, you could flip this team with the Central. I think the numbers would tell you that. I think the stats all say the Guardians, Twins, and Royals are better collectively than the Phillies, Braves, and Mets. But if I'm stacking teams in the postseason of teams that I would be scared to face, I think the Phillies, Braves, and Mets are way scarier than the top 3 teams in the NL Central. The Braves and Phillies are, I think, have a way higher ceiling for the World Series. The Phillies are arguably the scariest team in the National League. Braves still have a ton of talent, a lot of veterans, and they've been there before. Yes, the Central teams on paper, the stats say they're better, but the eye test and the actual fear that I feel goes toward the NL East. That's why I have them at number 3. Number 2 in the power ranking, I got the AL East, who is typically number 1 in this. The Yankees and Orioles have the 2 best records in the sport. The Red Sox are still within a couple games of a wild card spot as well. And the Blue Jays and Rays are not terrible teams. Yes, they're not making it to the playoffs, but they're not like the White Sox or the Angels or the Rockies. And so the AL East has a lot of talent overall. They have 2 teams I definitely think could get to the World Series, and the Yankees and Orioles. I just don't think the AL East is better than the NL West, who I have at number 1 in my power ranking. Call me biased, but like I said, 3 of the 6 best records since June 1st in the NL West. I think they have 3 teams that could win the World Series in Dodgers, Dbacks, Padres. Meanwhile, I think the AL East only has 2. Plus, you have the Giants also as a solid team. Yes, the Rockies suck, but overall, I think the NL West has the highest ceiling of teams that can win the World Series. They're the only division in baseball that I think has 3 legitimate teams that could win the World Series. I don't think the Mets can. I don't think you could say Royals, Twins, and Guardians. There's no way you believe all 3 of those teams could win the World Series. And then the Red Sox, their pitching staff probably just isn't good enough. They had a better pitching staff. Maybe I would add Boston on that list as well, and then maybe the AL East could be number 1. But because they don't, the NL West is by far the best division in baseball. Now, that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back next week for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Doses.